Hey, how's it going? This is Alex with Grow How, and today we're going to talk about apples. Now, we're going to be talking about apples today, and there's just a couple things that's going on. First of all, it's middle of August, and in about a month, maybe a little bit less, I'm going to be harvesting my own apples. Second thing is, cool temperatures going into the fall, late summer into the fall are really good for planting most things because really up until the soil freezes, there's so much less stress on a plant than trying to plant in the summer or even plant in the spring. You plant a plant now, it gets nice cool soil around its roots, it cools off, it's not getting hot. At least in a couple of weeks it'll cool down. And so planting in September through really November, sometimes even on in December, is really my favorite time to plant. And so I'm thinking about apples and I'm thinking about varieties. And there are a few things, probably more than a few things that we ought to look at when we're planting plants. Today I'm gonna specifically look at apples. Although a lot of this applies to other plants, but I'm going to talk about apples. So the first thing is your USDA zone. This is talking about how cold your temperatures get during the evening, really. The coldest temperatures you're going to get in most years. Those are 1 through, oh gosh, I know it goes up to at least 12, but I've never lived in a 12 area. And this map covers all of North America, by the way. Just because the USDA made it doesn't mean that Canada and Mexico are left out. There's still information about those. I don't know if those countries have their own systems. I've never seen it. I don't read Spanish well enough to know anyway, and the Canadians seem to be familiar with it. So when you buy an apple, you want to check them. You want to make sure that USDA zone is within the area you live. Now, there is some variations. I live technically in a 7A by the map, but I also know that I don't have a weather station here in my city, so they're making a guess between the two nearest weather stations, so I may actually be really a 6B. And kind of keep that in mind because there's some flexibility depending on your topography and some other stuff. So don't get too attached to this. It's a starting point. Okay, so minimum temperature is going to be an issue. Now there's something called chill hours. Now these are going to be a pain in the butt. There is a mathematical way to figure out what your chill hour is, but you have to have data and you have to have the formula. And I don't usually use that because it's a bit more work than I need to do for what I'm doing. And keep in mind, if you live in a cold area and your plant is listed as having 200 chill hours and you're in Ontario, you're probably going to have difficulty. If you're going to have 1,000 chill hours in Ontario, you're probably a lot closer off. One way around this is to be more aware of what is planted around you. I can go to a number of my neighbors, I can see an apple tree back there, I can get an idea of what is doing well in this area. And so researching and saying, what are my neighbors planting, what's doing well, what have they had problems with, is a really good thing. It can help you avoid stuff. Now the other thing I want you to look at, and you don't hear this very often on apples, but it's very important, is what the season length is. How long does it take that apple to produce a viable fruit that's going to be worth harvesting? Now, you'll hear and you'll see it in any list of apples. Generally, there's going to be, oh, this is a really late apple, or this is a late apple, or this is a mid-season apple, or this is an early apple. Those are really rough measurements, but it will give you a picture. For instance, a late apple here where I'm at is Granny Smith. Good apple, nice tart, firm apple. A lot of people like it. It's one of the more common apples you'll see at the grocery store. Its growing season is about a week too much for this area. And that's, I say about, because I've had people say, oh, it does great where I'm at. I have no problems with my Granny Smith. It's a great apple, on and on and on and on. However, a block over from that person, they're going to have a cold pocket and it's never going to fully ripe. So for a Utah apple, northern Utah apple, that may not be your best one. And certainly if you have friends, I never get ripe Granny Smiths. it's probably one you're going to want to be careful of. But again, it's only about a week out, and so there's going to be some variation. But be aware of your length of your season. It's not exact with apples. I've never seen a chart saying how many days from bloom to ripe fruit. There's probably one out there. I haven't seen it. They're not common. Probably ought to Google it. Okay, moving on. Another thing that you're going to need to look at is what you want to do with the apple. Are you going to eat it fresh? Are you going to can it? Are you going to make it into pies? Are you going to make it into juice? Are you going to make it into cider? Are you going to make it into applesauce? Do you want a combination apple that does as much as you possibly can? And that's going to vary. Now, there are people out there that say Honeycrisp is a great pie apple. I've found it in almost none of the lists that look at good pie apples, but I know a lot of people who love it for a pie apple. That's fine. As long as you know what you're getting and know what you like, then you're going to be covered. But if you don't know that, you might want to do some research and make sure you understand what you're doing and understand that, there's some really great apples and you can cook them and they're going to turn to applesauce. Not necessarily a problem, not necessarily a bad thing. But if you want, that classical apple pie recipe, you're going to want that. How you're eating it, again, a cooking apple, a baking apple is going to be something you want a little bit more firm to it. An eating apple, typically you want some crispness. I don't know anybody that likes mushy apples. I know there's got to be somebody, but I don't know them. And so keep that in mind. There are people that will use a granny for cooking and won't eat it fresh because it's just too tart without some extra sugar for them. So be aware of that. Personal taste. Again, what do you like? The current movement for the last, I don't know how many decades, has been towards sweeter and sweeter apples. Your Fuji is a very good example of that. It's for a sweet apple, it's really quite good. It's got some nice flavor, but it is very sweet. There's some people that like a tartar apple. For eating, I really prefer some tartness to the apple, a little bit more complexity to the flavor. Storage. If you plan on storing your apples at all, you need to look at storage. What stores well. Now, I have noticed that sweeter apples tend to store a little bit better, especially if they're a late season sweeter apple. So that may change things. I have a Fuji because it stores well. That was the first apple tree I planted. Now, moving along, let's talk a little bit more on the science rather than the preference. Another thing that we have to worry about, in addition scientifically to how cold it gets and how long your growing season is how hot it gets. I don't know really a lot of sources that talk about heat. I do know that for southern Utah, for the St. George-Dixie area, they generally don't recommend growing apples because, there are apples that'll grow in a zone 8, which is what St. George is, but is relative to how cold it is at night, it is so much hotter during the day that a lot of apples, the trees will grow, but the fruit just doesn't set well. It doesn't get crisp. It's kind of soft, doesn't last long. And so you really also have to look at your daytime temperatures, your extreme temperatures. Now, another great example of this is Honeycrisp. Honeycrisp is a lot of people's favorite apple. I personally don't like it that much. It's sweet. It's not sour. It doesn't have any complexity. It's not even highly sweet. It's just sort of sweet and very crisp. Great texture. But it does not like heat. And so even though it's rated to, I think, a zone 7 as being its upper end, you plant it here along the Wasatch Front, and a lot of them struggle with the amount of heat we have, and a lot of them have poor quality fruit or just don't fruit at all because it's hot. Now, there's some other issues with Honeycrisp. Pretty well anywhere you grow, the Honeycrisp is a little bit more of a finicky apple. It's more of a specialist apple that even orchards have problems with. But for where I live, it's got a really spotty record as being productive because it's just hot. We get periods where, for a week or 2 weeks, where the temperatures are in the upper 90s or low 100s, and it's just too hot for them. So again, I don't know of any charts to talk about the heat on the apple and what it can and can't take. That is one thing I'm going to be studying in future years, so maybe next year I'll have another video. But keep that in mind. And then once you've got an idea what you're going to use the apple for, what your area is like, and what apples will do well, then you can go and look at some of these lists telling you what kind of apples, And I hit these lists a lot because even though a lot of these people are getting their same information from the same places ultimately, which is quite often the people selling the apple trees or the test gardens for the different extension agencies, I find that sometimes somebody's got some personal knowledge that makes it into one of these lists, and then I get a little bit more information. But then you can look at the list, look at the zone, understanding that you're really hot in your area and you may need something that's maybe rated for a zone 7, but something that's rated for a zone 8 or a zone 9 might be more appropriate because those 8 and 9 areas tend to get a little hotter. It's a little fudge factor. Knowing again what your neighbors grow around you and what they've had success with. Now, in this part of the world where I live in Utah, through most of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you're going to have 2 trees planted for apples: Red Delicious and Yellow Delicious. Once in a while, well, with a fair amount of frequency, you're going to see you're going to see Jonathan, you're going to see some Macintosh. And when you're looking at apple trees that were planted up through really into the 80s, maybe even into the 90s, you're going to get primarily those 2 apples and then the other 2 apples. Once in a while I'll run into a greening. That's cool. Once in a while I'll run into an early Jonagold. But I can pretty well bet if I walk into a yard and there's a certain time period, I can say, that's Red Delicious, isn't it? Oh yeah, how did you know? I'm just brilliant. So when you're looking at an old apple, you're going to see those. But the great thing is you look at those and you can look at the growing conditions. You're going to know, oh well, this apple over here is also very similar growing conditions. It will probably do well. Now, I'm going to give a plug in here. I love my oddball apples. It's great to have a Fuji. It's great to have a Gala. It's great to have a Jonagold. I mean, I've got a Fuji. I want a Jonagold. I like the apple. But there's something to be said for those old varieties. Now, they were not bred for modern tastes. They're not going to be as sweet as most of your modern varieties are because we, as a culture, are moving more and more and more towards sweet apples. But by getting an older apple, a lot of times you're going to get a lot longer storage life. If you're going to go with, say, an Arkansas Black, now that's a longer season apple. I don't know yet if it does well in this area, but I'll use it as an example. It's got an incredible shelf life. Great shelf life. Very likely that you're going to have that into, well, past Christmas at least. You're not going to find that very easily on a modern apple. They're made for storage conditions in a storage unit where the air and the temperature and everything else is very well controlled. But again, if you go with an Arkansas Black, it's an old-fashioned storage apple. You're going to have it for a while, even under less than perfect keeping condition. Golden Russet is a great little apple. I have not tried one yet. High sugar content, good keeper. Now again, it's probably not going to be as tart as I like it. Maybe it will be. Actually, a little tart goes a long way with me because tart apples are so uncommon these days. But it's going to keep for a long, long, long time. Now, also how you use the apple. If you're going to eat a fresh apple, the apple varieties that are coming out today are pretty good. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I'm waiting for my first Cosmic Crisp to come on the shelf so I can try it because this is supposed to be a phenomenal eating apple. How's it going to bake? Nobody's tested it yet. And so for baking apple, again, older varieties you might get more success with, although, a Jonagold should be a good baking apple. They're out there. I've certainly done enough pies with Fujis because my family likes sweet apples, so if I make a Fuji pie, they're pretty happy with me. But you're going to get, generally speaking, you're going to get some of your better baking apples from older apples apples 100 years plus, at least 50 years plus, is again, 50 years ago when I was a kid, or just before I was born, we were much, much more likely to bake our own apple pies. Also, if you're going to look for something for juice, you really ought to look at some of the older apples, and certainly cider. And by cider, I mean traditional fermented cider, hard cider, alcoholic cider. You are going to want to look at older apples and crab apples. And all these things probably deserve their own video, and maybe I'll do them one of these days. Let me know in the comments below what you want to know about apples, and I'll see what I can cover it. And in the meantime, take this time to study things out, figure out what's going on, figure out what you've got in the area, and figure out what you want to plant, and then go ahead and do it. I've never had anybody that's done their study that's regretted planting an apple tree. Certainly, I haven't, and I'm going to get my first apples this year after being here for 3 years. One of those a little bit premature. I'm going to have to stake up the trees. It's still not rooted well. Oops, that one just takes a while. So let me know what you think about apples, and please hit the subscribe button. That makes a real difference in how YouTube interacts and lets people know what's going on. The more subscribers I get, the more people that can find the station, and the more people that can get help with their gardening and their fruit trees. Very important. Anyway, so thank you all. I appreciate you watching, and catch you later. Manana.